What's up guys, AFK Tech here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Panasonic G7. So we're going to go ahead and start off with an unboxing. So the reason I'm doing a voiceover is because the audio with the camera originally, the RX100, was a little bit messed up because I was kind of to the side of it and it picks up, a little bit better inflection here and a little bit inflection there, so I decided to just do a voiceover with my Yeti. So we're just going to go ahead and unbox this. So this is the Panasonic G7K. DMC-G7K is the actual model number. It comes with the 14 by 42 millimeter kit lens. And the box is, pretty standard for your camera. I wish it was a little bit maybe shrink wrapped, because when I got mine, my lid was actually open and things could have potentially fallen out if the packing box was a little bit larger. Here we got, your manual, lens lineup from Panasonic for their Micro Four Thirds line, driver's disc with utilities in there, not really anything huge you need there. Quick setup for 4K photo, which we'll, talk about a little bit later. Not really anything too crazy rocket science to actually figure out on your own. So getting to the actual contents of the box, first thing you're going to find here is going to be a camera strap. So this is a nice little thing to see. My complaint with this is it's a setup where you have to actually intertwine it through some loops. So it's kind of a pain to take on and off. I'll definitely be replacing it with something that I can unclip and clip on really easily. That way when I do go outside with it and use it on the move, I'm not really struggling to get that on there. There's a kind of like the lens flare cover for the end of the lens. It's nice to see, so if you're outside you don't get any lens glare. There is a USB port, so this is so you can transfer stuff just via the camera versus taking the SD card out and putting it into a slot itself. That's nice to see, especially if you're not big on taking the SD card in and out, but I don't really necessarily need that. You have a on-the-wall charger. This is nice. You don't have any extra wires, so you just plug that bad boy in and slip your battery in there. It folds up, really easy, compact to carry around. And then you got your battery, of course. It's a pretty standard Panasonic battery, and they're pretty cheap to find third-party replacements, but be careful when you're finding those. Make sure you're getting ones that have good reviews, because power is important. You don't want to be putting something in there that's going to potentially actually harm your camera. Now we're going to move on to the lens here. So it's wrapped up. Something I noticed right off the bat is this thing is small. It's crazy how small these Micro Four Thirds lenses are, and this one's actually mostly plastic construction, so it's actually pretty light as well. If I had to say anything disappointing about this kit in general, is obviously the lens. It's definitely a very capable lens for what I need it for, but it'd be nice to see a nicer one, but it is a kit lens nonetheless. So now we're getting on to the actual body itself. So it's wrapped up in pretty standard wrapping for camera, and there it is. So I got the silver model actually. So typically it's black, but I got the silver model. It's the same price. Thought it'd look a little cooler, a little bit more retro looking, and I definitely like it. So right off the bat, the quality is pretty good. You're not going to be getting a solid metal aluminum frame with this camera, because the price point for what it does is already pretty awesome. So it is mostly plastic build itself. The lens connection dock there is actually metal for the lens, but it's a fairly light body, which is you can take with whichever way you want to take it itself, because it's light, it's easy to move around, but maybe your long-term durability with this camera isn't going to be amazing. It does have a pop-up flash with it. Some things I saw reading about that is it does yellow pictures a little bit. It's not the best flash, but then again, it is a built-in flash. It's got Hotshoe up top, which is pretty standard for a camera like this. It's a nice thing to see on these Micro Four Thirds. Sony's form factor, some of them don't have the Hotshoe. And it, this really just reminds you of a DSLR, even though it's not an actual DSLR camera. So it has articulating LCD screen, which is touch enabled. This is an awesome way to monitor yourself if you're doing any sort of video work. If you have it set up on a tripod and you're doing kind of like an interview style and you're the only person there, or you're doing any sort of self-portraits, that's definitely an awesome thing to have. And that's definitely one of the big reasons that I was attracted to this camera in the first place. On the sides, you got your little hooks for attaching the strap that we saw earlier. And overall, the the body of this is pretty nice. You got your mic port, which is another big thing for me, especially for doing video. You want to have an external microphone. You can check out the link over here for the microphone I'm going to be using. It's the Rode VideoMic Go. But overall, this camera itself is really cool, and the most attracting thing about it is the features that you get for the value. For the price that you're paying for this, you're getting 4K video, you're getting an awesome lineup of lenses and ability to use a lot of different lenses, and you're spending less than $1,000 for 4K video. I don't know how many times I can say that, but that is the main thing for this camera, is video. You're not going to be getting this if you're trying to shoot the sharpest stills possible, but if you're trying to shoot video on a budget for YouTube, for anything, this is the camera to get. So now we're going to go ahead and get into some actual video of the camera, so video from the camera, 4K, 30p, 4K 24p, and then some 1080p stuff comparison. 1080p on this camera wasn't the best necessarily, but if you're going to be getting this, you should shoot in 4K and then downscale it to 1080p in order to get that extra sharpness. So now we're going to compare video clips on the different output settings on traffic that was passing by my apartment window. So here's the first clip in 4K 30p. As you can tell, it's pretty crispy looking. Here's the next clip in 4K 24p. So it does get a little bit more jaggy. I didn't have the shutter speed set perfectly in sync with the 180-degree rule, but overall you can get a better idea of what it'll look like. Now we're on to 1080p at 30p. So I think the biggest thing here is you can obviously tell there's a lower resolution, and also it's a little bit grainier, and that's due to the lower bit rate that this camera has in comparison with other 1080p shooting cameras. One other nice feature this camera has is then the 1080 at 60p. So this allows you to do a little bit of slow motion work if you ever need to, because you can cut your frames in half in terms of speed and still retain the same smoothness effect. And this video is just a 4K 30p pan that I did from my apartment window. Just giving you a little bit better idea of what it looks like when the camera is actually moving, and just some different details instead of just boring old cars passing by. It really does a great job on focusing, and this is one of the spots I wanted to show you. So once I move over to the brick, it zooms right in, and there's an awesome depth of field involved with that. Here you can see a little bit of the moire and the anti-aliasing, and it does really well. It looks really great. It's very crispy at 4K. So now we can take a look at some of the settings, the buttons, and just the general setup and structure of the camera itself. So let's go ahead and get started here with just kind of getting into the quick setup. So here's the 14x42mm kit lens that comes with the Panasonic G7, and then here's the actual camera body itself. So obviously, first step, I'm sure most of you aren't going to be new to this if you have had a camera before, a DSLR for that matter, is putting the lens onto the body. So this is kind of a delicate process. You don't want to be, throwing dust anywhere. You don't want to have this open longer than you really need to. You're going to line the red tabs up on the side of the lens here, and then on the body, and you're just going to twist until it clicks. So it's pretty straightforward, nothing too scary. It does have a little bit more resistance than some DSLRs that I've actually put lenses on, but not a big deal here. So now that we have the lens on there, we can go ahead and boot the camera up. So you have a battery in there. I had mine charged before, so there's the battery. Put it back in. I don't have an SD card in currently. Not really worried about that right now. So let's go ahead and flip it on. So the flip switch is actually going to be here on top of the camera. So we're going to flip it on, and then this is the mode selection switch. So you've got several different modes here. You've got movie mode, you have manual, shutter priority, aperture priority, P, program auto. It's a program auto, eyes, intelligent auto. You've got kind of an art function. We'll go into that a little bit later. We've got the scene mode, so it's selecting maybe a type of scene, panorama mode, and then C, which is your custom mode. So you can set this up to be whatever mode you want, and then you do have 3 different custom modes that you can go based off of that. So once you get it turned on, we're just going to go ahead and put it in the manual mode here for now, manual picture mode. That way I can show you a little bit about what each one of these dials does and how you can set your camera up. So before we go ahead and get into the camera though, let's take a look at this other dial. So this is one complaint I've seen about the G7, is that it does have a lot of dials on it. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of defunct that, because I think the dials that are on here, once you get used to them, once you use them, are extremely useful for someone that's new to photography and someone that has been doing photography for a while and wants a lot of control over things. So there's several different modes over here. First one's going to be single. So this is going to be if you're just taking a single picture. Most of these modes, just for reference, only pertain to the camera mode, so if you're actually taking stills. So this is single. We have it on burst mode now. This is 4K burst, so that's a cool feature with the G7 that we'll talk about here in a little bit. You've got an HDR mode, so it's an auto bracketing, auto step mode. So it'll do different exposures, take 3 pictures and step the exposure on each one. You've got a timer mode, and then you have a time lapse mode. So we're gonna go ahead and put it into burst fire for now, and we put it on manual mode, and we can go ahead and take the screen out here. And we'll go ahead and flip it around and bring it back. This is a huge deal for me, having that there. That allows me to monitor myself when I'm doing my videos. So now that we have the screen here, let's go ahead and take a look at what we can do with this. So this is already kind of set up because I have been using this camera for a couple of months, or for a couple of weeks now. This is already set up because I have been using this camera for a couple of weeks now. But I'm going to go ahead and go over everything with you guys. So on the back side here, let's go ahead and start off with some of these other switches that we have. So we have a function 5 over here. So by default, this controls your live viewer settings. So whenever I put my eye up to this, it automatically turns the viewfinder on. When I take my eye away, it puts the touchscreen back on. So you can go through and set this to different modes. Viewfinder only, touchscreen only. You have viewfinder, and then monitor, so touchscreen. So that's the auto mode that we were in to begin with. Here we have the flash button, so this goes ahead and flips up the flash. So that's kind of a nice feature to see a flash on this. Let me get this in frame for you guys just for a second. So that's a nice feature to see. I am not really big on that because I won't be doing too many stills with this. Go ahead and close that back up. Okay, so that's all the buttons over here. On the side, you have a little dial here, and this allows you to set the focus on the viewfinder, so making sure that it is at the right angle for you to be in order to be able to see what is actually going on. Next up then we have this button right here, and switch. So we have an autofocus lock here. We have autofocus mode selection switch, or focus selection switch mode. So we have autofocus set, we have autofocus continue, and then we have a manual focus, which is operated by the dial on the lens itself. Some interesting things to look at here. Autofocus, there's a ton of different modes for it. So I have it in a touch type mode right now, so you can touch on the screen the sector or the area of the frame that you want to be focused on, or you want the autofocus computer to focus, it's focusing on, if that isn't a tongue twister. But you get what I'm saying. But outside of this, not only can you just use it for that, but you can also go over here on the side and you can go to this button, and this brings up your different types of autofocusing modes. So maybe you want it to be on face detection, maybe you want it to track an object, maybe you want it to just figure out what needs to be focused on. So this would be your more point and shoot mode. Maybe you want to set up a custom mode, so maybe you want it to focus on anything that's level with the middle of the frame or directly in the center of the frame, up and down. That's your choice. If you want one area, so it's literally the center of the frame is your focus point, then that's cool too. And then there's a pinpoint. This is kind of a cool little feature, so we'll go ahead and set to this real quick. You can pinpoint where you want things to be focused at. So this allows you to do very specific focusing in a certain area, and then it remains focused in that sector of the screen no matter what. So it'd be handy if you're doing some sort of follow along, anything around that. So we're just going to go ahead and leave it on the 49 area mode for now. So then down to manual focus, as you can see, when you do mess with the manual focus, it brings up a magnifier. So this magnifier allows you to see very closely this area that you're focusing on with the camera. And this is an awesome feature for someone who isn't really all that great at focusing yet and wants to be able to see exactly what they're focusing on. So as you can see, I'm focusing on the edge over there. Another awesome feature with this is focus peaking. So I'm going to move the lens cap out here and see if we can get it to do a focus peak on it. So as you can see now, the edge of that lens cap is starting to turn green because that is showing you the focus peaking where the manual focus is actually focused on. This helps you pinpoint your focus point on an object, and it's an awesome thing for beginners and professionals alike because, like I said, you really just know exactly what you're going to be focused on. There is no guess and check work. It's telling you this is what the sharpest part of the image is focused on right now. So we'll go ahead and flip it back to autofocus mode. Some other little buttons here that we have a function 2 button. So this is set up at a quick access menu, so your most recently accessed items. So we have different settings up here that you can go through, your aperture, all that good stuff. That can be set up custom as well. You have your review button. I have no memory card in here right now. It's a pretty standard review interface. You can use some dials to scroll through, which is kind of nice, and zoom in and out. And then you have your display button right here. So this is going to cycle through all the defaults. So let's start with this one right here. This is just an information screen. This is something you might be more familiar with if you're using a DSLR, where it's not actually a live view of what's going on, but it's more of an information screen on what you have your ISO set to at the time, maybe what frame speed you have it set on, your aperture currently, your flash, what your exposure's at, all of that good, awesome information that you need to have right on hand. And this is an awesome mode for doing quick adjustments, so you can click on it and bring up that specific setting and make an adjustment to it. If you hit display again, display goes off. Here we have just a general display mode. It shows the date down the bottom, and then it pops up and shows you, your monitoring levels, which I have set up to actually show up, your aperture, your shutter speed, what your exposure's at right now, your ISO, all that good stuff. Then we have one where it's just a clean frame. One complaint I do have is I don't think there's a way to get rid of some of these side features on here. So these are just kind of extra function buttons. It's kind of a pain because you can't get rid of them even in the mode that is supposed to be the least intrusive on your screen. And then we go to a mode that carries the balance. So this is going to show you if your pictures are level. This is an awesome feature, especially if you're maybe out on the trail, you're outside, you don't have a tripod set up with a level on it. You can go ahead and see, is this picture pretty level? It's going to bring you, it's not going to be perfect because it's not a very, very smooth level by any means, but it is going to allow you to get things fairly level, and if you need to fix anything, you can always make that tiny little adjustment in post. This also does flip if you do a portrait kind of setup. As you can see, it'll flip so that the level becomes vertical with the screen. Alright, and then there's a mode with no extra display and just the level. And then we go back to our standard display mode. Some other little hotkeys we have here. I'm going to take this back to just a general display mode. We have an ISO. So as you can see down the bottom right, you can control this ISO with your fingers. Or you can set it up with the scroll wheel. And so that's where these two scroll wheels come in play. They're usually used to make adjustments in settings. So as you can see, this is going to adjust my ISO by moving this scroll wheel. And then I can set an ISO limit with the other scroll wheel, as you can see in that top right area where it says ISO limit. This is an awesome setup once you get used to it. So it is a little bit different right off the bat, maybe if you weren't using something similar to this before, but once you get going with it, it is something that you will fall in love with, I promise you that. So maybe you don't want your ISO to be above 1600 because that's when the noise starts to come into play. Set your ISO limit there, and then if you're in any type of auto mode, it'll automatically stop once it gets to ISO 1600, and it'll reduce your exposure, but you won't be sacrificing your noise. So we'll go ahead and move over here to white balance. So once you set your ISO, you can go over here to white balance. So there's several different modes in here. I have it set on a custom one that I set with a white piece of paper in my last shoot that I was using this on. But you have several different modes, as you do with most any other camera. You have ability to set based on your Kelvin if you really want to get specific, but most of the stuff outside of video will be able to be fixed by shooting RAW with your camera. So then we have a function 3 on the bottom. So this is going to show you your guidelines. So do you want to have the bars across the screen, or maybe you want to have, that grid across your screen, or you want to have a pinpoint that you can set in a specific area. That's your own thing. And you can also set this function key to something different. And then we have autofocusing mode, which we already covered. And then we have the menu. So I'm not really going to go through the menu crazy much. So there's several different settings here. You can set up photo styles, filters. This is where you're going to set, everything, what kind of file format you're shooting in, type of autofocus that you're using, how your 4K photos set up, which we'll talk about here in a minute, the length of your self timer, your time-lapse animation settings. There's several different things in here that I'm not going to go through everything here because this video could go on forever. But there are some cool little features in here that you can use. This is where you can set up your color spaces, whether or not you want image stabilization to be on, face recognition, and so on and so forth. So then we have the motion picture setting. So this is kind of my area. A really cool thing with the motion picture setting is they do have some sign-like setups, which is awesome because that gives you a very flat color profile for when you're doing video and allows you to make some really cool enhancements in post. So we have different types of recording formats. As you guys probably know before watching this video, this camera does shoot in 4K. Shoots at 30p, 24p, and then it shoots 1080 at 60, 30, and then 720 at 30, and then VGA at 30p. I wanted to go ahead and go through the megabit, or the bit rate on these, because that is something I had trouble with finding. So I did find that 100 megabit for the 4K, which is awesome. Not necessarily totally uncompressed by any means, but is very good for the price of this camera. The MP4 for the 1080p though was a little bit disappointing for me because with the RX100 I had an ability to shoot 30p at 50 megabits a second, which was a lot more data stream, less compression, less artifacts. Through my testing I kind of noticed that the 1080p on this camera isn't as sharp as I really wished it would have been. But however, if that discourages you, I want you to think about this. You should shoot in 4K no matter what, unless you need 60p, which then I probably recommend checking out other cameras. But if you shoot in 4K at 30, you can always downscale it and your 1080p will be very sharp. So you can set up, if you want continuous autofocus in your videos, what kind of luminance level you want in video. You want your mic display to be on there. So I have my mic level displayed in the bottom left of this. That's what you saw earlier when I was talking. And that's an awesome thing, especially if you have an external microphone. It also shows you the display for that as well. You can adjust your external mic volume. You can turn on wind noise canceller. I'll turn that off once I set up my mic with it. But overall, there's a lot of cool little features in there. As for custom settings, these are a little bit more specific, not necessarily all needed. But these are all here and helpful for a lot of different things. This is where you can set up if you have picture-in-picture for your manual zoom, type of the monitor display. Do you want stuff to be on the edge? Do you want it to be on the top and bottom? There's tons of different features you can go through here. And then for setup, so these are the more administrative topics. You got your clock set, your times, your Wi-Fi, what beeps, what frame rate you want your live view to be at, and setting up your monitor. So you want if you need to adjust the luminance, maybe you don't like the colors that you're getting out of it, setting up USB mode, and so on and so forth. Playback wise, I haven't really messed with anything in here. There's not really anything that was necessarily huge for me in here, and definitely didn't really have any input on any of that. One thing I do want to mention though is that this does have Wi-Fi. So there's a Wi-Fi light up here that'll light up whenever you're connected to Wi-Fi, and it's been pretty helpful with the remote shooting app. I'm not going to actually demo that today, but it is an awesome thing if you are sitting 5 feet away from the camera. You can have your iPhone or your Android device on your lap and you can trigger your shutter. So whether or not you're starting a video or you're actually taking a picture, it's a very handy little thing, and you have pretty instantaneous live view. It's not full resolution and very crisp, but nonetheless you do have full live view, which is really nice to see. Outside of that, we have a Hotshoe up top here, just going over some more external stuff. You have a record button, but the shutter records and this records too, so I don't really know if that was necessary for Panasonic to include. Another function button, this is going to mess with your exposure, and then you can set these two dials, as I was saying, to do different functions. So right now we have them set, or I have them set for aperture on one and shutter speed on the other. So that's a nifty little thing to make quick adjustments on the fly without any problems. Otherwise, there are some little ports on the side here. This does not support clean HDMI out, so you won't be doing anything with any capture cards, but you do have a remote and HDMI for playback, and then an AV out and digital port. On the left side, you have your microphone port, so I have a Rode Video Mic Go that I'm going to be using with this, and that mounts up here on the Hotshoe, which slides out no problem. And then outside of that, there isn't really anything else I have to say about the physicality of this camera. So really, the thing to think about with this camera is, what is your main purpose? If you're shooting stills, then I don't necessarily think this is the camera for you. Maybe it's a good introduction camera for you if you're just now getting into the mirrorless format, but I think that there are other better options with higher megapixel and a little bit sharper picture quality for stills right out of the box. However, if you do plan to do a lot of video, then this is the camera for you, because the 4K ability within this camera for the price point that it sits at is honestly unrivaled right now. There are some other mirrorless cameras that are coming out in the Micro Four Thirds format that are starting to include 4K. Just recently, the Sony a6300. However, that is over $1,000 just for the body right now. So if you're shooting in 4K, then you cannot go wrong with this camera. There are some quirks that I have noticed in my use over the past couple of weeks. One big thing is, if you are going to the viewfinder, your nose sometimes will accidentally bump the autofocus. So when you go up to the viewfinder and you cover it, your nose will bump this. Well, the touchscreen part is still picking things up. So I'll move this down to here. And as you can see, we were down here in this corner now. So it'll move your focus even though the screen's technically off. Alternatives to this is setting it so just viewfinder's on, or moving this out to the side, or closing it completely. That is kind of a little bit annoying though, especially when you're doing a video and you're just kind of looking in to make sure that everything looks okay and get a better view of what you are actually recording. Outside of that, I've been really happy with this camera so far. I haven't got to use it a ton yet, but so far all the time that I have used it has been very exciting and a big learning experience for me, because I'm not a huge camera guy to begin with. Outside of that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is AFK Tech signing off. I just want you guys to support me. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment if you have any questions. Feel free to answer any questions. I'm no camera expert, but I will for sure try to get back to you and give you an answer if it's regarding the camera or any sort along that. Outside of that, click my Amazon link that'll pop up here in a second, and it'll be down in the video description, as that will give me support and kickback when you guys purchase things on Amazon. It'll allow me to do more reviews for you guys and continue to make videos. Alright guys, I appreciate your time. This is AFK Tech signing off.